So what in WeatherXM, what essentially we do is we utilize a dense network of weather stations, devices like this one, that community deploys, and we try to provide the most accurate weather forecast service possible for the customer's exact location. So most of the worldwide economy is weather sensitive, and these are just two examples. In agriculture and energy, there are tens of billions to be saved from wrong operations and resource wastes, and by having a slightly better weather forecast, which depends very much on the actual weather data. So, and because there's not enough weather data, the forecasts are not very good. And weather data are produced primarily by ground stations, the satellites and airplanes and so on, but ground stations are really important because these are the data that are used to calibrate all the others. And weather stations typically are expensive, they're complex to deploy, they're limited by a number of factors, and we have given the governments the role to usually deploy those. So as you can imagine, they're doing a very inefficient job here. So we believe a new approach is needed for a global impact, and we are inspired by Filecoin and Helium, and we have designed a new economic model for deploying weather infrastructure. So in our model, we use our native token, crypto rewards, in exchange for the weather data that the community generates, the weather station owners generate, and we ask our customers to buy and spend those tokens in exchange for weather services and raw weather data. And to support this model, we had to create our own hardware. This device is one of the 3 devices that we have, 3 types of hardware that we have, and it's designed specifically to be rolled out in large quantities. So to make it as easy, as simple as possible for community members to deploy it. And it's energy and communication autonomous, so that means you just put 2 batteries, it has a solar panel, you just put it out there and magically works, doesn't need anything. This particular one connects to the Helium network. But the most important aspect of it is we added a crypto chip that signs the payload from the GPS and from the sensors, so we essentially have cryptographic proofs about weather conditions and proof of device and proof of location on chain. So we also have a Wi-Fi device and a LTE, GSM device, and we're going to launch more hardware this year. So we are iterating very quickly on hardware, and I think this is really important for our project because the state of the industry is quite old. The stations are quite cumbersome, the traditional ones, I mean. And we also have a mobile app that our users can use, and you can actually install yourselves, that you can see historical real-time and very accurate forecasts for the locations that we have stations around the world. So if you're lucky to have one of our stations in your area, you can benefit from this for free. And we have shipped a lot of hardware, more than 7,000 devices already. And we're not even on mainnet. So we have a token, but we've been on testnet forever. And we've built a network of 4.6 thousand stations in more than 80 countries. And obviously the rewards that we give to our community, to the weather station owners, they are not like airdrop of a meme weather token. They're based on the quality of data they produce. And the interesting part here is that if you compare our network to NOAA's, our quality of data is way, way higher than what the government network is. And if you try to download the data from NOAA's weather stations, roughly 50% of this data is missing because the stations are offline. And in our case, we have more than 80% of our weather stations in pristine condition, because we have created a number of novel algorithms that we try to detect if the station has been deployed properly, if it has any obstacles near it that is blocking its sensors. We can detect a number of different things by looking at the time series data. And we call this quality of data, and it's the most important aspect of the reward mechanism that we use in our network. So we haven't launched our B2B side of things yet, but we have traction from customers. We're doing a lot of pilots from energy companies in California up to shipping companies from China. And we are also very active in the public goods space. We are collaborating with ETHDenver. We are donating weather stations that are deployed in farmers in Mexico. Obviously, the global south lacks weather infrastructure the most, so they immediately benefit the most from improved weather forecasts. And one of the services that we can provide very easily by having additional weather data is what we call quality of forecast and mosaic forecast, which is basically a hyper-local forecast that is built on top of third-party forecasts and the ground station data. So what we do, we are not claiming that we can compete with NOAA. NOAA operates on a $7 billion annual budget, and they actually spend $1.2 billion just to maintain their weather infrastructure for those 13,000 stations. So huge waste of money. But anyway, but they do a global forecast, and that's not easy. So they do a global simulation of Earth. They use supercomputers. They're using super old legacy Fortran code, but that's another problem. And yeah, so we input those forecasts from NOAA, from the European agencies, from multiple meteorological companies, global ones, that they have different models, therefore produce different forecasts. So those forecasts are contradicting each other. And we use our ground station to detect which forecast is the best for that location per element and day ahead. And we create this mosaic or this synthetic forecast, basically, that is more accurate than any of the other ones. And we can prove this on-chain, on Filecoin. All the data we use are open. And basically, this is a huge tool to convince our customers that our service is superior. Marla, how am I doing on time? Should I go into? Awesome. So I have a small demo here. I wasn't brave enough to do it live, so I have a few slides. So this is a portion of the infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure we have, which relates to data management. And as you can see, unfortunately, a huge chunk of it is in AWS. So I think, especially in DePIN projects, it's really difficult to decentralize the whole thing and make it like a protocol. So in our case, we're using a lot of AWS infrastructure to transform data and to calculate this quality of data that I mentioned before, and therefore finalize like how many rewards each station should get. And that's not cool for the crypto world. In my point of view, it shouldn't be that way. So with the help of Tableland and Filecoin, we have a parallel stream where we export the data to decentralized infrastructure, and we are doing the same calculations again. We are providing mechanisms for anyone in the community to validate that the rewards that we're giving are actually the ones that we should. We're using another project of the Protocol Labs ecosystem that is called Bacalao, Compute on Data, which is another super cool project. And with this computation power, we can retrieve data from Filecoin and do all this fancy stuff. So I'm just gonna very briefly show you how this looks like if you try to do it. So it's just 3 simple steps. Step number 1, you go to our Intex website, the network website that has all the data, because we export all the data of the project on a daily basis. You select the day that you want to use, then you select the Docker container of the quality of data algorithm that the latest one that we have published. You fetch the rewards, you execute, you send a job to Bacalao with the data, and then you fetch the rewards. So this looks something like this. We have a GUI there that is also hosted on IPFS. You can select or download your Parquet files, S3 large files of the network, and then you execute a command, a Bacalao command, which is like a Docker execution that you specify which data set you want to use, what is the name of the station you want to calculate the quality of data for, and a number of other parameters. And what's interesting with this is that in a couple of seconds, you will get this score calculation back by using only 12 cores and 32 gigabytes of RAM. And that's for one station. And we have 4,500 stations. So that's really expensive to do on AWS. So the sooner we get rid of AWS, the better it will be for everybody. So once that happens, what you get is a very detailed JSON file that explains how what was the quality of data per element through a bunch of detection mechanisms that we have, classifications and so on. And you also get some pretty looking, well, at least for scientists, plots that they give you a sense of, it's like a sanity check for humans to make sure that this is not just crap. And the same results are made available in IPFS, so you can connect to them and process them further on. Yeah, so I think like we have a lot of work ahead of us in order to completely decentralize our project, but we're actually doing some great progress. And it's really, I feel like I'm really excited that we're working on a project that is one of the most challenging one for humankind.
Well, you don't get to leave yet, but you do get to sit down if you like. Although I think panelists should have to stand usually, because it's too relaxing to sit and get sleepy. So maybe in the program it said we would do audience Q&A now. This is a time, you don't have to stand. It's up to you. It's up to you. I'm messing with you, yeah. But now I feel guilty if I make you stand up. So if we have audience questions, we are happy to take them now. But I will get it started. I have a couple of sort of directions that I think would be interesting to go. One is just how what I'm seeing in the DePIN world is a lot of collaboration, which I love. In fact, I've made this comment a lot in crypto circles in general, that when I go to a conference like this, I feel like I'm meeting up with my coworkers that I've never met, and we're all on one big team trying to build a new internet and beyond at this point. So just want to get your like takes on that as people who have come all from centralized world to decentralized world. Like, how does that feel different than it does in normal and quote unquote normal industry?
I guess I can start. The first thing is, it feels like, in the enterprise space, it's always very competitive. We're very early in this space, so I'm a big believer in the rising tide raises all boats, and we're so early that really, there is no competition at this time. People come and ask me, what do you think about IoTeX versus Peak or DIMO? And I say, honestly, whatever project you're building on, that's good for everybody, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all here to improve the way we deal with physical assets, at least in the DePIN space, and rising tide helps all both.
It's not easy to have a couple of demos competing with you, at least for, I don't know, I mean, DePIN is picking up quite fast, so maybe I have to take this back in a few months. But I think also, like you said, Chad, like we probably left the corporate world and the old school approaches, and we came to this ecosystem because we appreciate the values here more. We are all pro open source. Obviously, you can't go far without it. And I think we share similar values and culture. That's why it's so easy for us to collaborate and build stuff together. And it's way more fun that way.
Yeah, I agree with all those things. I think we've been working really closely with these two guys to really understand where we fit in the overall infrastructure space, and we understand that there's lots of players in there, and we want to learn what they're building so that we can complement and make sure we're sort of building the right thing where there's an opening and where we see this sort of long-term path. But I also just think, what you have said earlier is at the end of the day, do you think we're capitalists to some degree? Human nature is there. And so I do think that's a piece of it is we're still so early that we're all collaborating to build this big thing that accrues a bunch of value. And then we believe that we're all going to find a place to create that value. And our hope is it's not going to be, just Amazon that has access to all that data or Google that has access to all that data, because there really is so much to go around. So I think that's what we're all here to do, which is kind of refreshing.
Yeah, cool. And another thing that I've noticed about at least the two sort of specific use case projects, WeatherXM and DIMO, is they start out kind of centralized. And it might be something kind of off limits to say here, but I think that's the way you have to do it. So people are actually buying these things and deploying them by the thousands. People are normal humans are using this stuff. And if you go on YouTube and search for either of the two projects, you will find people who aren't developers and aren't crypto people saying, you got to try this thing, it's so cool. So part of this is just to say, thanks for actually building products people want and using crypto as the back end. And then of course, Tableland, Ceramic, et cetera, for enabling by looking at what they need. But I am curious to get your thoughts on just starting centralized, starting with a product focus, starting with I think a product needs a point of view and a steward, and then eventually decentralizing, because you're both talking about eventually decentralizing, right?
Yeah, I mean, decentralization and DePIN, I think, can take a different form depending on the network. I'm sure mine looks very different than Manolis, right? In terms of decentralizing the data access, who's using it, who's providing the data. For us, long term, we want the car to come from the factory, DIMO enabled. We want that to be the default option for people. But when we started, it was very Web 2, to your point, right? And we've had to push nonstop to try and make it more and more Web 3, and it really comes down to the team and the belief in the team. And I mean, I'm very, very motivated to fix this problem because I love cars. I'm sure Mano is motivated by other things, as are other people. But yes, it's very hard to build a decentralized robot network for cars today, right? It's just impossible, is the honest answer. So we have to take kind of a Web 2 approach of, you don't have a problem until you have it, and build what you have today, and get to where you're trying to go.
Yeah, I agree that the technical solutions and the approaches at the end are going to be completely different. But I think probably we have a lot of common concepts and backgrounds, by the way, because I think for companies to build hardware, they need some serious, skills and experience and background. So I'm guessing it will have to be people who were doing this already before the crypto pivot. And that's our case, and I know that's the case with many quality projects as well, and DIMO as well. So, and I think we are entering. I was reading an interesting article from Nick Grossman from USV, and he's using the term crypto enabled instead of crypto native, and it's difficult to have hardware and claim crypto nativeness. It's I might be using this term sometimes when I'm saying we're essentially building a hardware weather oracle, native hardware weather oracle, but I think the correct term here is enabled, because if you're interacting with the physical world, there has to be some points that you have some kind of control, but that control can be delegated to other people as well. So it's usually in DePIN projects, you usually find a pair of a company and an association, which might be from the same people at the beginning, because somebody has to start this. But eventually, those two entities, they split, and more people join them, and they have different goals. And one is giving or taking services from the other. And I think the quality projects are being honest about it. And that's why we are open presenting that there's a lot of centralization taking place here, because there's no other way to do it. If somebody here has the solution to this, please come and find me. But we will get there. I think we will.
I'm glad you called out this crypto native thing, because I think in almost all cases, this is a word that creates bad behavior and creates a cult-like bubble. And it creates horrible products. And that's why crypto users are eating glass every day when they try to do anything. And that's why, aside from a few projects, no real people are using crypto, right? So it's kind of I was in the 90s, I was one of these open source zealots that was one of the first people to ever install Linux at home. And there was a saying that turned into a joke. You know, next year is the year of Linux on the desktop. So 2024 is the year of Linux on the desktop, you know. It's become a joke, and it becomes, yes, old people unite. But it's become a joke, and it kind of feels like a failure, but I think it wasn't actually a failure, and I reflect on how we are similar to that now. I'm pretending I'm a panelist. I'm supposed to ask questions, but I'm excited by this. Back then, we believed in open source, and we still do. I still do. And we wanted it to be the thing that won. We wanted to beat all the bad guys, the Microsofts who owned the desktop at the time, and Apple, et cetera. And so therefore, we wanted it to be in people's faces. But what really happened is, like, how many Linux devices are in this room now, or open source powered operating system devices? It's crazy. Like, we're just surrounded by them. There might be one in my body, I'm not sure. So we are Linux enabled. We're open source enabled. That's where I think crypto goes. And so, like, kudos to Nick. He was here a minute ago, actually. I'm not sure if he's still here, but you know, good call out. And so, Marla, for you, so you're sort of on the other side of this. What I love about what Tableland has done is you've taken all these real, like, pragmatic use cases, and you've seen real traction, and you say, okay, how can we make this better? How can we make it cheaper? How can we make it easier? And then, of course, decentralized also. So how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, just exactly what you were just talking about. I thought what's interesting with DePINs is there's like, the one thing is the ethos is you're coming into it with this sort of promise of transparency, because with a centralized org, it's like you get everybody into this ecosystem and then you can make the rate whatever you want it to be. Whereas if you guys tried to do that, probably, you know, in 5 or 10 years, it probably wouldn't go so well, because the people who are part of the ecosystem have been promised some element of a return, and so it would backfire. And so I think going into it with that mindset makes it decentralized. But what we're trying to think about at Textiles, how do we add real value to the core things that are being enabled by any ecosystem, in this case DePINs. And so one of those things is you're telling people you're going to get rewarded for doing certain things, and that's meant to be provable. So how do we make that provable in a way that those things aren't happening in a black box while thinking about privacy? And we're progressing towards that. So that was just one use case that came up that we're like, you know, as a user, what do I want? What really makes this whole system valuable to me? And it's understanding how you're calculating the value that I've put into the ecosystem and then rewarding me accordingly. And that's, you know, what we're piloting right now with WeatherXM. We also are doing some experimentation with IoTeX and WebStream on that, where the first version of that is we have to calculate those things still sort of in this black box, because we're not there with all the pieces of the infrastructure to decentralize. However, we can make that data open so that people can feel confident that what we say is happening behind the scenes is happening. And then the next level to that is, how do we stream that data, you know, directly to this decentralized ecosystem, and then have that calculation initially happen out in the open? And so these are like the steps that we're trying to think about. We know we're not going to get to that gold star tomorrow. Like we're at the end of the day, we're building a new technology, everybody in this room, and I think, you know, that takes a lot of work. But we're just trying to think about pragmatically, what does the short term look like while balancing our long term vision of what we think the data layer of the internet should be. And we have high hopes for that, which I think I've been hearing these two agree. So
Great. Okay, we have a few minutes left. Do we have any questions from the audience? We have a microphone for you. Oh, great.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. So I just wanted the panelists to double click on the verification part. It's a two-part question. One is, do you think that in the case of DePINs, a lot of the verification challenges can be solved through proof systems? And if yes, like how do you see those kind of scaling? Like, you know, I think like with DIMO, you mentioned, you know, like a bunch of proof verification things you're working on. Yeah, just like would love to know your thoughts on that.
Scaling the proving is going to be difficult, right? I mean, for DIMO, an average car generates 5 gigs of data per hour. So verifying all of it and getting it all onto decentralized storage is many, many years away. So I think it comes down to what's the minimal that you need to verify to make the system functional, and functional for who? So for us, it's developers that want to build mobility applications, whether it's charging or insurance. So we're trying to, within limits of what's possible, focus on what's the minimum required to verify a vehicle, And over time, more and more verification methods can come, right? That make that more real, I would say, or different ways to verify. One thing that we recently started working on is, what does a DIMO unconnected vehicle look like? What if I just wanted to use the DMV information to say I own this car, to transact without connecting it, right? So I think it's really, at least in DIMO world, attaching as many verifications as possible onto the vehicle, and they could be from the DMV, from the insurance, from another car, from a charger, or something along those lines.
I think there is a balance, like how much resources is worth spending into making sure that you can verify the stuff that you think is happening, and I think in the crypto space, because people are used of exchanging tokens on chain, they have over-engineered it. Well, not for their standards, but I think they have worked a lot on that problem because the value locked was huge, and it makes absolute sense. But where we are today with most DePIN projects, I think the approach should be way, way lighter. So for example, in the hardware that I have here, we have a microcontroller that has encrypted communications with a module that is pretending to be a GPS, is not exactly a GPS, but is receiving GPS signal, and then is receiving LoRaWAN signal and encrypts that and forwards it over the LoRaWAN backhaul, and then we have proofs at various levels, but everything's hackable. It's just that we think that the cost to hack this hardware is not worth hacking it, and that's a good balance to stop there. And it's a similar approach to what you do on chain or on your backend cloud and so on. And I think as the value of the DePIN projects increases, then we will see more sophisticated approaches and ways to solve the scalability problems as well. But this is not necessarily today. I think it's easy to do a good enough job for the time being.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just, I've touched on this earlier, I just think the more open data we have access to, the more verification and proof of things happening is going to become a lot easier, because we'll have data coming from various points in various ecosystems that can be cross-referenced to add some confidence that something happened. So I think that's what we're really excited about, and I think that will help with the proof question.
This is exactly actually what you were talking about, using LoRaWAN as an additional proof, and I'm sure you can come up with other indirect ways that you can enhance that part. And the reason why I mention it is because this device can actually sniff Wi-Fi as well, so we can do Wi-Fi localization in addition to other stuff. I mean, I wasn't supposed to say this, but it's all right. I mean, the hardware, the specs are there. We are open sourcing our hardware, by the way. Like, we open source the previous generation every time we build a new one. So we want to create an ecosystem of manufacturers and or even enthusiasts that they want to try to hack this or improve it. So yeah, and the next one is going to be even better.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for your work and for the presentations and the questions.